I want to welcome all of you to our event this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Premilla Nadasen, and I'm the director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women and a professor in the history department at Barnard College. Our event this evening, Rage, Struggle, Freedom, Unveiling Feminist Perspectives on Global Crisis, is hosted by BCRW. BCRW is a feminist research center at Barnard College, Columbia University that brings into conversation scholars, artists, activists, and students through programming and publication. These categories are not distinct, as our event tonight makes clear, since panelists are both scholars and activists. Before we begin our discussion, I have a few words of thanks and acknowledgement. Tonight's event is taking place online, but we are all physically located somewhere, and we recognize that all land is Indigenous land. The land on which Barnard College was built is part of the Lenape-Hoking, the traditional and unceded territory of the Lenape people of the Delaware Nation. The Lenape were displaced from their homelands to places as far as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, Canada. We pay respect to Indigenous peoples past, present, and future, and uplift their continuing presence on their homelands. We also acknowledge the legacy of forced displacement, enslavement, and genocide of Indigenous African people. We understand that our existence on this campus, using the resources of this institution, has been enabled by a history of both land theft and labor extraction. In terms of accessibility, you can find a link to access live transcription for this event directly under the video in the YouTube video description or on the BCRW event page. I also have a number of thank yous. I'd like to thank the BCRW staff, Margo Kotler, Hope Dector, Sandra Moyano Aritza, Olivia Cummings, Pam Phillips, Sophie Kreetzberg, and Kelsey Kitsky, as well as our really wonderful staff of student research assistants. I'd like to thank Carmelo Falou and Vanyo Molinedo from Coco Language Advocacy and Consulting for ASL interpretation. And our captioner tonight is Mirabai Knight. I also have a disclaimer. The views shared during this event do not necessarily represent the views of Barnard College. As an open forum for academic freedom, BCRW may not agree with and is not responsible for any comments made tonight. So on to our event. This is a very special event to launch the just released, hot off the press issue of the Center's online journal, Scholar and Feminist Online. And the title of the issue is Rage, Struggle, and Freedom. And there's an image of it, and a link to the journal will be in the chat as well. We are thrilled tonight to have the guest editors, Margo Okazawa-Rey and Elif Sarican, as well as two contributors, Şervîn Nûdem and Gwyn Kirk, here with us. Deep, deep gratitude to Margo and Elif for their nearly 2 years of work in putting this issue together. There has been a lot of back and forth and close collaboration with our editor, Sandra. And it's an absolutely beautiful issue that includes stunning artwork, including the cover image there, which is an original piece of artwork by Gwyn Kirk. Lots of insightful analysis and timely conversation. And I also want to thank the entire editorial team at BCRW, without whom this issue would not have been possible. I'm especially honored to host this conversation. Both the issue and the conversation come at a crucial crossroads in geopolitical and feminist history. We have seen in the past few years an accelerated drive towards authoritarianism and fascism. intensified militarization and warmongering. Just this week, there has been a renewal of violence in Syria that is having a devastating impact on Kurdish people. There's been turmoil in the past couple of days in South Korea, as well as the relentless, horrific, and escalating violence in Gaza and Lebanon. All of this is coupled with an unprecedented rise in the number of people forcibly displaced, an ecological crisis, and assaults on gender studies and reproductive justice. But at the same time, there have been inspirational feminist movements across the globe. The Kurdish women's struggle for autonomy, radical democracy, women's liberation, and ecology that are really an important part of this journal issue. We've also seen over the past year a powerful anti-war student movement that has spread to campuses worldwide. There's been mass organizing for reproductive justice. And of course, the Gina revolution sparked by the murder of Gina Amini a couple of years ago. Part of what is exciting about this issue for me is to see the many locations, forms, and strategies of feminist resistance and the inspiration we draw from a feminist reimagination of the world through art, poetry, and through learning about the struggles and visions of Kurdish, Polish, Black, Indigenous, Baloch women, as well as women living in militarized zones. So I want to extend my thanks and my offer of congratulations to all of the contributors. To give you a little sense of what the evening is going to look like, we're going to talk for about an hour, and then last 10 minutes or so, we'll open up for Q&A. I'm going to give fairly brief bios of each speaker because I've asked each of our guests to start by sharing a bit about their academic and political work in order to provide some background on who they are and how that's reflected in the issue. And Margo and Elif are also going to talk a little bit about curating the issue and the work they did on that. So Margo Okazawa-Rey is Professor Emerita at San Francisco State University, an activist and educator working on issues of militarism, armed conflict, and violence against women. Elif Sarican is an independent researcher, writer, editor, curator, and translator who collaborates with cultural institutions and universities around the world. Gwyn Kirk is a scholar activist concerned with genuine security and a sustainable world and is a founder of the International Women's Network Against Militarism and Women for Genuine Security. And Şervîn Nûdem is a member of the Genealogy Academy and has been involved in collective education, writing, and research, and works in different regions of Rojava and North and East Syria. So I want to welcome all of you. You'll be joining us on the screen momentarily. And I want to thank you for joining us.
Hi, well, hello everyone. I'm a little bit speechless. Apologies for that. Hello everyone. Hello Premilla, Sandra, all the people who made this issue possible, and on the Barnard side, and of course all the contributors, some of whom are with us this evening. I bring you greetings from Bangkok, Thailand, where we are in the last day of the 15th forum, the AWID Forum, Association for Women's Rights and Development. And I want to tell you that you would be inspired because what Premilla talked about, the various feminist movements around the world are vibrant, they're present, they're loud, they're powerful, and no one anywhere from the Pacific Islands to Gaza, to Lebanon, the Kurdish women's movement, no one is giving up. Rather, they're even more inspired and see this moment as an opportunity. So that's how I want to open my part. Elif, over to you.
Thank you, Margo. Yeah, I mean, I want to repeat the thanks that you just said. I won't repeat all the names in the interest of time, but yeah, it's been a really beautiful process putting this issue together. And Margo, as you previously described, really a labor of love. And anyone who reads the issue, like especially in the introduction, will read that how Margo and I also came to this in terms of really thinking about a lot of the alternatives that Margo has been involved in organizing around for decades, that I've been thinking around for, for some time as well. And yeah, I think one of the ways that we describe it in the introduction is, a mosaic. And I think the reason why describing it as a mosaic is so beautiful is because it's not a puzzle. So it doesn't all fit together perfectly, but it makes a very beautiful picture. And I'm really proud and I'm really honored to present a issue that has thoughts, ideas, histories, alternatives, practices, theories, art, poetry, and art in a way that is not just disconnected, as Premilla also said, from the work of, from the serious work of thinking, from serious political work, but completely intertwined and actually, really bringing to you what we as people involved and who really deeply believe in the alternative that will come from women's struggle mean when we say we want the bread and we want the roses. And I think to me, it's a reminder that not that we just have a world to win, we have our world to win. So yeah, really excited to hear our contributors' thoughts this evening. And, obviously so many of them we won't be hearing from this evening, but can't wait for everyone's thoughts on receiving it all.
Great.
Yeah, should I continue? Or? Yeah, I also would like to thank all of you for making this event and also the invitation for participating to the journal possible. And at a very cold winter night, I'm sending you the warmest greetings from the Genealogy Academy in Rojava, which is based in the regions of Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. And at the moment, with the attacks that are initiated or commanded by the Turkish state and with the hands of so-called jihadist groups, but they are actually affiliated, a part of the Turkish occupation war that is going on for a long time, but has now reached a new stage. So our heart and thoughts are with the families, with the women, the children who are now under the cold, trying to find a way out of places that are encircled. We know that also the defense forces in that region have done their best to ensure a corridor for them to get out, but it's a very hard moment of defending life, defending existence, defending human dignity in this region, and but at the same time, we have seen many people that when we share with them, we gain hope again, and so these moments of coming together and seeing that people who have the less are sharing that what they have with each other, even if it is a warm hug or a piece of bread, but at the moment, everywhere the people are trying to support each other. Actually, like for introducing myself, genealogy, I don't know, there's not much time maybe. Maybe very shortly, I can say that genealogy can be translated into English as science of women and life, and it's to challenge the dominant narratives, myths, religions, and so-called objective truth of positivist orientalist science. And against this, the genealogy has been developed in the context of the women's liberation struggle in Kurdistan as an alternative science with the aim to collect and connect women's wisdom and knowledge, and to share and develop analysis for succeeding the women's revolution on regional and on global levels. So what we call a women's revolution basically means a process of rethinking, rebuilding life and society on the values of grassroots democracy, justice, communal and ecological economy, and women's liberation. And any woman who is in the search for freedom, who wants to share her wisdom while learning from each other, can be a part of it. It doesn't mind if she's an academic, if she's an activist, a house worker, a farmer, if she knows to read and write or not, if she's young, if she's old. So it's a science that is developed by all the skills and wisdom and experiences that women have, and any woman in the world is invited to contribute to it. For my personal background, I can briefly say that my search for freedom and justice led me more than 2 decades ago from the anti-fascist youth movement and autonomous women's groups in Germany to the women's liberation movement in Kurdistan. And since 2016, I've been involved in the works and the life and organizing of the Genealogy Academy in Rojava. But actually, instead of introducing myself, I wish that today our dear friend Nagihan Akasel would have had the chance to introduce herself to you, and maybe we can show her picture. Nagihan is the main author of our article, A Journey from Rage and Resistance Towards Xinjiang Azadi, which we have submitted for the journal. But Nagihan cannot be physically with us today because she became target of a political assassination, which was carried out by a gunman of the Turkish Secret Service in October 2022 in South Kurdistan. And we know that those who are responsible for the murder of our friend are in Ankara, and they do not only continue to enjoy impunity, but they also continue to carry out further crimes against humanity, including feminicides against activists of the Kurdish women's movement, whether it's through contract killers, through drones, through bombardments, or just now, as with this jihadist mercenary groups, which are attacking at the moment the region here. I got to know Nagihan as a brave, thoughtful, warm-hearted Kurdish woman who dedicated her life to uncover the truth and to unite women in the search for freedom. She was in love with the nature, her land, the society, and with this love she lived and fought at any time of her life. She was active as a student, activist, and also imprisoned for demanding the right to education in her Kurdish mother language. Then after she was released from prison, she continued to work as a journalist, as an academic, as a researcher, as a political activist in different regions of Kurdistan. And from 2015 onwards, Nagihan played a very important role in developing the scientific and institutional foundation of genealogy as a science of women and life. And in this process, we got to know each other. And yeah, I can finally say that her thoughts, her love and dedication are still with us. And yeah, they are showing us the path for continue with our struggle. And yeah, in this sense, I can say that Nagihan is also a part of this evening for us tonight.
Thank you. I believe I'm going next. And I just want to say thank you so much, Şervîn, for introducing your work and your colleague. As you said, she's with us. And all that in the work that you've been doing. Like the others, I want to thank the editors and everyone at the Barnard Women's Center for this exciting and very timely issue. I hope readers will find it useful and inspiring in these challenging times. My contribution to the journal is to curate artwork created by members of the International Women's Network Against Militarism over the past 25 years. The network links grassroots activists and scholars across the Asia-Pacific region. We support each other's local struggles. We strategize together about militarism and advocate for feminist genuine security, not militarized state security. Social movements and artistic expression often converge and energize each other through music, songs, spoken words, or visual arts. The network has mainly created quilts and banners. This is a great collaborative form where groups of individuals can contribute to a larger whole. Although working in fabric may be dismissed in gendered terms, sharing political ideas this way takes household skills out of the domestic sphere and into public space in powerful ways. Sophie, could you show slide 1? Thank you. So this is the most recent example completed last year in the Philippines. Each country group brought some piece with them that had ideas of what is a feminist vision of genuine security. On the top row from the left, you see the work from South Korea, the continental United States, Okinawa, and the Philippines. And the bottom row from women in Japan, mainland Japan, Hawaii, also the Philippines, and Guahan, sometimes called Guam, and Saipan. Although there are huge differences of history, culture, economic and political power in between these places, they're all sites of major US military bases, military maneuvers and operations which promote US dominance across the region. The next one, please. This drawing by Okinawa women affirms our activism, moving from fear and frustration to courage, hope, and energy. The military buildup by the United States and allies, now focused on possible war with China, includes many forms of everyday insecurity, contamination of land and water, violent displacement and disregard for people's autonomy, crimes of gender-based violence, and a colossal waste of taxpayers' money, all reasons for rage and despair. The imposition of martial law in South Korea earlier this week is just the latest example of how elites suppress people's movements in order to keep militarism going. The third slide, please. Thank you. This banner shows our hands across the ocean, this vast ocean that connects us, advocating for genuine security together. All activism creates something that did not exist before. It requires intention, focus, vision, and imagination. Artists and musicians help us tap into feelings of hope, anguish, yearning, passion, strength, and vitality. They feed our hearts and spirits and open up a politics of possibility, thanks to Margo for that phrase, where we build community together in creative ways. As we all know, authoritarianism is on the rise in many nations, including the United States. In response, people's creative resistance is crucial in whatever ways are possible. The epitome of hierarchical organization, militaries and militarism are destructive on many levels. Leading Zorica Mircevic, professor of human rights law, to comment, the opposite of war is not peace, it is creativity. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share this work. I'm very excited about this new online issue and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you all so much for those opening comments. I actually want to ask Elif and Margo if you'd like to talk a little bit about the questions of activism and academic work. We did hear from Şervîn a little bit about what they're doing, Şervîn and Gwyn, about what they're doing on the ground. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what brought you to this work and how you bring together the academic work you do and the activist work you do.
Well, let me start by saying that I'm retired, so that's the very good news, and that even though I retired now, I started in the academy much later than usual. So, first years of my professional life, I was a social worker in the Boston area, and working in communities of color, specifically. With youth and women coming out of drug treatment. And so, I went into the academy to learn how to teach. And of course, that's not what you learn in the academy. And so I ended up, I'm one of those, unintended, academics, I guess. And because of my original grounding in the community, I had no doubt where ultimately my location is with communities and trying to be of service through the academy. So there's never been a split for me between community and academy. And so I feel very fortunate also that my most major commitments in the academy were at San Francisco State University, which is known for all kinds of groundbreaking achievements as a university. So the first Black Studies program, for example, in 1969, that led to other Black Studies programs. So I see being in the academy as, being a source of inspiration in many ways, source of access or access to resources, so my main commitments have always been in communities and during my sabbatical, I took a leave, did a Fulbright, and ended up in South Korea and came to the most important fundamental awakening, which is the presence of the U.S. military bases in Korea, which as a U.S. citizen I knew nothing about, and the history of the Japanese imperialism in Korea that still left its mark. Right. So those two things, the commitment to community from the start and the awakening through the Fulbright, really pushed me into my commitments, which now are over 30 years, in using the academy, to employing the academy in service to the communities I'm a part of.
Thank you very much for that, Margo. I mean, I guess I have to start by saying I'm not in the academy, and it's, yeah, I guess in a way I never have been, but my relationship to that kind of work has been always to try and fulfill, or try and fulfill partly at least some, like, the curiosity that I've had just about the world, beyond just who I am and my context and so on, just the world and people and the humanity in it. And that led me to anthropology. And I think I was lucky enough that I was able to do my anthropology in a bit of a bubble, because much like the US and the UK, universities for the last few decades, and in particular the last decade, have not really been places of much learning, but are cooperations, as is in much of particularly the what we can call the Western world. But I was in a bit of a bubble that I got to, and therefore got to study with David Graeber at LSE and did anthropology, and therefore was able to kind of also really kind of, it kind of also engross myself in, like, the curiosity that he had as well. And I've said before as well, I think I was always a curious person, but I think doing that work with him, and also with lots of the other students that were around when I was there, really rubber stamped that curiosity that I think hopefully now I will really keep for the rest of my life. And I think, obviously our issue is called Rage, Struggle and Hope. And I think, like many people, and I think in particular women, I think for me the rage came first, and the rage came actually very early on in my life, where suddenly I became a certain age and I wasn't able to run around and play with other kids in the same way that I was able to, I don't know, at like family weddings. And suddenly I was, becoming a young woman, and there was all these like restrictions, societal restrictions that you hear about. And I think that's where the rage came from. And I think for a very long time, it probably stayed that way. And then coming into a lot of the political work that I was able to meet, particularly through like the community, the diaspora community, Kurdish community in London, I was able to find ways to channel that in a way that I think has been more useful. But I think for me, what's been the most important and useful is whether in and around the academy, whether around community, it's the connection to it all, and I guess what we can broadly call the learning of it all, has always been for me the most impactful, has been in the spaces in between. It's the most learning I've been able to do has never been in a classroom, or has never been in a situation that I was actually receiving information, although of course those can be very important and impactful. I think the most life-changing kind of learning that I've been able to do, and I can see the impact on that on others all the time, is that space in between. And it's in being able to see perhaps how life can be different, not just receiving information or exchange of information, but how life can be different. So I guess that's what keeps me going even till this day, is the kind of believing in the power of that learning in between, that showing each other of life and showing each other of different ways that we can be. And, you know, as Margo, you've said before as well, the constant reminder of who do we need to become to build the world that we all really want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that really struck me about the issue, when we think about knowledge and knowledge production, we often center that on the university, on the academic spaces, but so much of what comes through in this journal issue is the kinds of knowledge that has been developed in community in conjunction with women who are organizing with resistance movements. And I think that is a lesson for us about, the need for academics to also engage with activists in various parts of the world. And thank you, Ella, for mentioning rage. Yes, the title of the issue is Rage, Struggle, and Freedom. In the introduction, you reference Sarah Ahmed, and who writes, "Emotions are crucial to politics." And you talk about rage, hope, and love as forces for change. And I have witnessed so much emotion in feminist politics recently, like we all have: despair, anger, hope. Can you talk a bit more, each of you, about the role of emotion in feminist politics, joy and care, but also rage? And I guess I want to ask, is it always the case that rage has transformative power? And does rage necessarily move us in a direction of social justice? Can rage move us in the opposite direction? And Margo, you could take whichever piece of this feels comfortable to you, but Margo, you describe your feminist connections as love stories. So what is the role of love and how can we cultivate it? But I'd like us to just dig a little deeper into this question of emotion, whether it's rage or whether it's love or whether it's care, because all of those are really important themes that run throughout the journal issue.
Well, several years ago, I was talking to my class about the role of love, and Ashley Garcia said, "Oh, love is so cheesy. Why are you even saying that?" And people, she doesn't think, she changed her mind, luckily, after a while. But, love to me is the glue, that of life, right? I'm not even sure that's the right metaphor, but it's the source of life. And when I talk about my activist work as love stories, a series of love stories, a book of love stories, it is that I care deeply about the people where I'm connected for a long time. South Korea, Palestine, of course, the U.S., many parts of the U.S., in fact, and that love is both a fuel, that gives me energy to continue. Love is at the base of my curiosity. Love is also the foundation for my commitment to acting, to doing, and to be of service. So that's why I talk about my work as series of love stories.
I think that's so beautiful. And I think, in many ways, that's also connected to rage, and can be connected to rage as well, right? In terms of, one is sometimes actually then feeding each other, and like the love you have through the work you do actually being fueled also occasionally by the rage you have with the other thing that you're fighting against. And what I'll say is, I think, in terms of whether rage has, is always transformative or not, I think what I can generally say is no concept, no identity is inherently transformative for the better. And I think that's really important I think, for that to be understood, and hopefully that comes across in our issue as well. We certainly tried to make that quite clear in our introduction that we wrote with Margo. And I think the reason why that's really, really important to understand is that there isn't a magic formula. It's about what we do, and what we do tirelessly, what we do consistently, and particularly, I think, the political, and actually particularly as women's struggles, as feminists struggle, the ideological framing of that as well, right? And I think I've seen a lot of rage that has actually been quite the opposite, and therefore has been very destructive, because it's just been that. And I think that it can be that, and sometimes even, not to be naive, but that destruction can mean that, therefore you can start again and maybe build something beautiful as well. But I think there's always a risk there, where that rage isn't already informed by what the alternative can be and what we are building towards. And I think sometimes as well, and I think this is a particularly issue in the broadly Western world, is often we're also identifying the wrong enemy as well. And I think that's where rage can also be risky and dangerous, is not having a clarity around what it is that we're actually fighting against, and kind of having the fight with what seems to be, or what we think is, the kind of like what's immediately in front of us. And we can talk about this in many forms, and I think the specific examples don't matter so much in this specific conversation. But I think regardless, the being informed and being driven by feelings, particularly in a fight against, or in an effort to build alternatives to capitalism, is very crucial, because part of what we see is that the systems that we are forced to live under actually dictate that we numb or kill a part of ourselves. And therefore it's important to resist that by also defending the importance of the internal feelings. And hopefully that also means we kind of question ourselves. Like, the first line of questioning is also internally as well, and trying to make sense of what we are driven by. Şervîn, I think you're speaking, but you're on mute.
Now I didn't find the button. Yes, I totally agree with the points that the friends mentioned. I think it's something very important, like to see the connection of love and rage. It's not something that is actually very opposite from one another, but more to see how it can complete each other, or needs to complete each other, because the reality that we are living in at the moment is sometimes so unbearable that you do not want to feel anything anymore, or like the system is telling you, put your feelings away, be rational, and then you are also disconnecting a part of your human being. So the ability really to enjoy love and to be outraged, be enraged against injustice is something very important, because if we do not like because there's this kind of normalization of, let's say, sexist violence, racist violence, normalization of imperialist wars, genocides. If we do not feel rage against this, then we cannot fight it. We do not have the strength to overcome it, and really. We stay then in a situation where we perceive ourselves as helpless victims or as objects of domination. And this, to overcome this, it's really, really important that we feel, or that we direct the rage against the oppressor, against the enemy, but not against ourselves. And this is something that is like if we look at many situations or developments or things like drugs or many harming things, that substances or approaches that people use is because they cannot stand the pain anymore, but they are not fighting back, but imposing the pain on themselves or amongst themselves. So this dividing and ruling is also coming into place there if we do not direct the anger, the rage against the offender. I think in this context also a quote of Audre Lorde came into my mind as an ethical principle also for rage, like her famous saying that the tools of the master will never dismantle the house of the master. So the expression of rage, how do we express this and so that we do not become similar to those who are inflicting pain on us, but that we have ways of resistance, ways of fighting back, ways of developing our struggle in a way that we have ethical principles, that we can find the right tools to defend ourselves, but not in a way to become similar to the enemy. So in this sense, cultivating hope and love during these dark times, I think this in itself actually is an act of resistance and an act of insisting on humanity, giving meaning to life and existence, like what do we live for? And also realizing the beauty of women, children, people in our surroundings, and giving value to things they create, things that they share, and also realizing the beauty of nature that is also resisting, like a flower that is coming up, blossoming again under rubble of a house that has been bombed, and creating empathy with one another, feeling that we have sisters, friends that we can rely on in most difficult moments. I think these are expressions of love that we always have to keep alive and have to share and value for ourselves and with each other.
Yeah, thank you so much, Şervîn, for that. I appreciate, your thinking about how rage and love sit side by side, so we can see and witness horrific violence and feel enormous rage, but also feel enormous love for the people, for the community that has been destroyed, and to think about how to harness that rage for good, in a positive way, to fight back, to organize an anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-militaristic, anti-imperial struggle. I would like to talk about teaching and education more broadly, not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom. I see so much of what each of you do as involved in some kind of teaching and learning, teaching through political organizing, learning through struggle, in being involved in popular education, which can serve as an alternative to the neoliberal corporate university, to think about knowledge and education in its various forms as sites for empowerment. So any of you can start with that.
Well, perhaps
And
I'll start while others are collecting their thoughts. I really resonated with what you said, Elif, about learning in places that are kind of in between formal settings. And I feel that one of the things, much of the work of our anti-militarist network is really trying to change the discourse about security. So we've spent a long time talking about what we think genuine security is, as opposed to state militarized security. And, it's so ingrained in people in many places to think about security in terms of militarism. And so we've spent a lot of time in, whether it's talking, learning, thinking about the different experiences of people in the communities that are all part of our network across the Asia Pacific region. What is their experience of militarized insecurity, which is very powerful and I referred to before. So I think that's a really important role. When I first started teaching, I had the idea that the teacher should know everything. And it was very boring as a way of life, because you had to do so much preparation about things that no one was really that interested in, perhaps. And then I spent about 10 years working in women's peace movement. And I did go back to work in teaching in college, but I went back with the attitude of an organizer more than, thinking that I had to know everything. I just wanted students to feel mobilized, activated, inspired, engaged. They didn't have to think how I thought necessarily, but I wanted them to really engage with things. So to have that, even that approach to, learning within the academy, and I must say women and gender studies, feminist studies, was a very, at that time, a very hospitable, site for that kind of learning. At the same time, I've also been involved in doing things like anti-military fashion show, which is a way of trying to bring some of these ideas about militarism, to a general audience. This was developed in Oakland 20 years ago by the Women of Color Resource Center. And the original idea was to have a talk by a scholar. And then it morphed into thinking perhaps we could do something more creative. And I have to say, probably 40 people would have attended the talk by the scholar, and we would have thought that was good. 400 people came to the fashion show because they were all the sisters and mothers and friends of the people who were, acting as models, the people who were the makeup people, the hairdressing people, the people who had made the outfits. And so it was a much more generative kind of event. And so I've been very excited, actually, to do that kind of educational work.
I think as a woman of color first entering the academy, I thought there was, as Gwyn said, a correct way to be a professor, and that to be taken seriously, I had to act like the white guy in the tweed jacket, with the patches. And first of all, that never would have worked for me. It just wasn't my style. But also, for me, as with what I've said before, teaching and learning are relational practices, right? And so even though I even thought it was really cheesy, and if you talk to my students from my first 5 years, of teaching, they would tell you, and they would tell you how much I've changed, right? And I took seriously, what Paulo Freire says, that there's no such thing as neutral education. Education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom, right? Even with all the contradictions. And I think we're seeing that now in this moment even more, the demand for conformity, right? And so, being inside these institutions, what I tried to do was create little free spaces, as our friend Professor Jean Grossholtz, the late Jean Grossholtz at Mount Holyoke College would say.
Şervîn, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your work in popular education, because I feel like that's an important kind of alternative way of thinking about education and knowledge sharing and how that functions in genealogy in particular, because it's a whole framework that is not just about feminism or women, but it's about science, it's about life, it's about relationship to the earth. So if you could just talk a little bit about that work, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, actually, like educational works are part of our whole lives. Let's say, like we are learning and we are at the same time sharing. So we teach and learn at the same time. We perceive it like this. And but the concrete works also, especially for education in the framework of the Genealogy Academy works here. One part is school education in the curriculum of the children's, like of the high school in the sixth form. There's genealogy lesson in the classes, both in Kurdish, Arabic, mother language, and so it's about to challenge gender role stereotyping during the school education is one part of it. Another one is that we cooperate with the communes, the women's councils, the women's movement, and generally to have local education groups, workshops on specific agendas where we try to understand what are the needs of society and the needs of women, of certain groups of women at a certain time, and then organize discussion forums on this. And then there's a network of women's academies and also general people's academies, mixed gendered academies, all over the regions here. So, and they also have included genealogy as lessons from time to time. It's 3 days, from time to time it's up to 5 days, but that gives the possibility to establish agendas and to question like patriarchal mindset, to question or to rediscover history, to share stories, to interpret songs from a different perspective, and like to make sociological analysis, let's say, by listening to fairy tales or songs. One experience I wanted to shortly share with you, and there are the pictures that I picture 2 and 3. They are from a popular or an education program that we organized in the Şervîn region. It's under the name or the headline Responsibilities of Men in Building Democratic Family and Free Society. So how this came along was actually that we noticed that more and more there were incidences of violence against women, either that young women were supposed to marry and they didn't want, and the family was making pressure, and different things came up, and we had discussions about this in like with the women, and actually then we saw it's not the women that is causing the main problem, but it's the men. And so like how to make men reflect on themselves. And so some discussions were also in the general education programs at the academies, but we saw that men, like when they're in a mixed gender space, are very, how do you say, like they're like they cannot easily admit that they do something wrong, and they cannot admit it to one another too. But when we started like with an autonomous or with a seminar, with a role of seminar for men, asking them questions about their own socialization and what impact it had on them. For instance, as boys, that they always had to know everything and be the strong ones, but actually not knowing how to find a solution. And in the end, like coming to the point that patriarchy is not, or is mainly harming women, of course, but it's also harming men, and to make them realize that they are also not choosing free, but they are also pressed in a certain role, which is stealing some of their autonomy, of their dignity, of their personality, and how they are trained or enforced to neglect feelings, how they have to conform with other men. So we started with this series of workshops in all the communes in Şervîn, and like which was after the Afrin was occupied, so it was all in tents in the refugee camps. But the participation of men was very, very, good or interested. And then afterwards, also the men said, actually, we wish we would have this kind of discussions also together with our partners, with the whole family. So afterwards, maybe we can say show the next picture. So the discussions were led by commissions of women, but men participated to it. And then one main, like on one hand, we saw that in between the generations of men, there were different approaches. Like the young men actually do not want to fit in the feudal patriarchal patterns of their fathers, and the fathers also because they perceive themselves as supporters also of the freedom struggle, and they say that they give value to the women's struggle, but in the families again patriarchal patterns are often repeated. They try to disguise a bit and they say then, oh, it's not me who is doing who wants our daughter to marriage at a young age. Is the mother who is making the pressure, and then. Of the one son of the father standing up and saying, no, why are you saying like this? It's not mom's fault. I know it was you who made pressure on her. So like in this surrounding like family like situations also in family became topics that we were started to be spoken not between four walls or within one tent, let's say, but in the communal tents. And then afterwards, the men suggested that there should be also general discussions together. So a second or another program was organized to discuss about what do we understand, or what should a democratic family should look like? What are the responsibilities of the father, of the mother, of the children, of the aunts and grandmas, and how to relate to one another? What approaches does everyone in the family want for herself, for himself, and also from the others? So with this, like things that were not easy to talk about before, we had the experience that especially the younger generation felt encouraged to express also their views in front of the elders, and to make a step towards defining their own needs and responsibilities. So this is one example of the kind of education works that we made during the last years.
Thank you so much for that. And it does kind of help us think about how resistance, how organizing, how movements are in fact helping us construct a different feminist future, which is where I'd like to go next with our last question before we open it up for Q&A. And so I'm interested in thinking about the feminist future and how it manifests in feminist resistance. What is the connection between resistance and futurity? What are the ways we can reimagine the future? And all of you have done activism and organizing, have worked with organizations around the world. Your anti-militaristic work is not just anti-militaristic. I think it's embedded in there as a vision, as Gwyn, as you said earlier, about what genuine security looks like. So if you could talk a little bit about futurity, the feminist future, and how it's linked to the organizing work that you do in terms of collective organization, in terms of self-defense, in terms of security, in terms of alternative social organization, and thinking about new ways of being and creating new worlds.
I mean, perhaps to give others a few seconds to think about it, or like think about how to, I guess, bring it all together. The thing that immediately comes to my mind is not only because it sounds nice to say, but it's very important that any future we think of, we are working on making that in the now. And I think that's really crucial, right? It's not where there is there is a date, or there is a time, or there is a specific, there is something that there is some expectation or somewhere we need to arrive before we can accept that there is that future. And that's not in a naive way to not acknowledge and pretend that all the systems that be don't exist. Of course they do. Of course, you know, we as people, we as our communities, our societies, our nature, our environment, our entire earth is up against really quite a vicious set of systems all around the world. So it's not a naivety that future in the now is a very easy task either. It of course isn't. But there are also many parts of the world that people are really working quite literally blood, sweat, and tears to make that happen. And there's that we're already seeing that happen. So I think in terms of what the future can look like, assuming that we're also doing that in the now, I think it's important that it also understands, I think, crucially, who and what that future needs to include. So, all the things that we speak about, well, we have in the issue, from obviously society, people, women, the environment, nature, spirituality, faith, and all of the things that connects people and humanity to the universe as well. I think it's important that we have a sense of what that includes, and also how we relate to each other. So, and that's why we've spoken about this in hearing about what Gwyn, Margo, and Şervîn have said in terms of where also learning and education happens, and also where those transformations are happening. So I think that's really important. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the thoughts of others. But I wanted to just come in and say I think it's very important that we see that future as now as well.
Yes, really agreed. There is no road to peace, right? Peace is the road. We have to be trying to do it as we move along, however difficult that is. We have taken a kind of definition of genuine security. It's really from a UN Development Project document, a little bit expanded. So it has 5 principles. They are on our International Women's Network website under the pull down archive setting. And so we're talking about having the environment, physical environment, be sustainable and able to sustain, all human and natural life. That people's daily livelihood should be guaranteed. That people's autonomy should be also guaranteed and respected. That cultural values should be embodied there, enfolded in there, and that we should be protected from avoidable harm. When we think about avoidable harm, so many things, systems of oppression, whether it's sexism, misogyny, trans hatred, racism, are actually all avoidable if we just organize things differently. And so at the bottom, we're talking a lot about very different values that all kind of intersect together. I think one of the things that we hear a lot, and the Academy is good at this too, is a lot of analysis. And so it's easy. People often move towards analyzing the problems, talking about the difficulties. And we also need some free spaces to free our minds to imagine and envision what we really want. Because as Elif said earlier, rage is not just rage for AO's sake, right? Rage and activism is hopefully in some measure towards what we want. And so there has to be a clear vision of what we want and a clear expression of what we want, whether that's done as a manifesto, as spoken word, a rant, artwork, or whatever. There has to be lots of that going on. So I feel like one of the ways we need to, as activists, is to create spaces where people can also be envisioning what we want.
Margo, do you want to take this question of futurity as well?
Yes, I think one thing is really thinking about how feminist movements, feminist organizations, especially with the NGOization of movements, right, and seeing in this moment the backlash that is making, especially NGOs and community orgs, funded organizations, very nervous. I think the future has to really consider in a deep way, right, how to fund our movements and to reimagine what resources are. Now, especially the NGOs are very dependent on donors, on foundations, governments, and we're seeing, even though initially those may have been markers of success, we're seeing now how it's really coming back to tie us down and keep us docile and keep us quiet. So a future that I think we need to imagine and think about is what are resources and how do we organize our work in such a way that we are less dependent on donors, outside funding, etc. As the Color of Violence folks said, the revolution will not be funded.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's so important. This was, I think you're in part responding to this question that was in the chat, and I just want to read it out. Someone in the chat asked, what are the key ways women, activists, scholars, and nonprofit practitioners need to think about adapting to the current world trend, including the possibility of increased autocratic regimes? And so really thinking about how in this moment do we reorient, do we redirect, do we reimagine, not just what the future would look like, but also what our current struggle is going to look like. And as Elif already said, we're working in the now as well, right? The future and the now are completely connected and intertwined. But I think it is very, very important to think about in this particular moment with the rise of autocracy, with the rise of authoritarianism, with the rise of fascism, how our traditional modes of organizing will have to shift, right? We may have less financial support for the work we do, but it doesn't mean that that work isn't still there, that we're not still engaged on the ground, we're not still building community, we're not still politicizing people and educating people. I think that work goes on. It just might take a slightly different form.
Mm-hmm. And just a slight addition to what you said, Premilla, the way we're organizing now through formal organization nonprofits is not traditional. That's the modern way, right? The old way is more about networks and mutual aid and all those things. And I think part of the call is going back in that direction somehow.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Gwyn?
Well, before NGOs, right, which is not that long ago, there was a kind of, both an invitation and also pressure to organize differently, perhaps organize very simply, locally. I've been thinking a lot about what, the next president is likely to mean for local communities in the United States. At very, really basic levels, when we talk about genuine security, more people are likely to be hungry. People will need warm coats in the winter, even here in Southern California, and, lots of basic things. And so I think we need to sort of be organizing more around that. In a way, the pandemic was a good moment for thinking more about mutual aid, people supporting each other in very practical and basic ways. And then, of course, the pressures from corporations and everything quickly shifted us back to, quote, business as usual. But the new business as usual, I think, is going to be about, being much more plugged in perhaps lower tech ways even, certainly ways that don't need quite so much money. And there's also the question of how we support people who do this work full time. In the past, in movements I was part of, sometimes different people would share resources so that we could free one person or two people to be full time. This wasn't about raising a salary or getting, big grants, but it was sort of recognizing that the economics of all our lives and being able to pay the bills mean we've got to be able to balance the political work with, our whatever would be our day job, or help us go and keep going.
And of course, the whole landscape of the nonprofit industrial complex is very different in a place like Rojava, right, where there's a whole different way to that people have been under siege and have been organizing, in a very, very, very different landscape. And in some ways, it is the privilege of those of us in the United States who've even been able to rely on that kind of nonprofit funding.
But I think like the model of organizing, which we call like democratic women's confederalism, it's possible everywhere. And it's about, I see it like as small seeds, that how you plant them, how much water do they need, how fast they grow, maybe is different. But I think to build communes, assemblies in your neighborhood, to come together and to discuss about the problems, or if somebody is ill, to go and ask if she needs something, like the daily life, to organize the daily life, to ask each other is possible, and is a need for everyone everywhere to overcome this loneliness and isolation. Then like to come together on a certain point of certain interest, if it's culture, arts, music, if it's about sports, there are different ways on how you can organize. If it's about health, to find alternative ways of healing, to share knowledge about natural health, that is not making market out of or selling you medicine that is harming you, but to ask the grandmas and other people in the community who have knowledge about these things and share it. Then, like economics, to find ways of how to build up small cooperatives, ways of how you can together ensure your income. There's a need, and I think it's about bringing together the capacities. And the other point is self-defense, of course, like how to mentally, psychologically, socially, and also physically, you can defend yourself, your community, the nature. There have been also things like Vendo in the feminist movement in the 70s, 80s have been developed. I think it's very important. And we have to defend all these things that have been created by women and by the struggle of women's movements. We have to protect this against being capitalized, or who says marketized, becoming something to make profit out of it, to be sold and advertised and things like this. But this experience that we have, which is not like outside NGO, outside liberal understandings and marketing strategies, we have to go to keep this essence. And like if we build up these networks in different parts of the world, in different regions, and we connect them, we don't need states anymore. We don't need states that exploit and put something in our heads, but we think by ourselves. So I maybe in connection to this, I wanted to show the picture of the women's cooperative in Kobani. It was just after like Kobani was bombed to earth and down to earth, and then afterwards, and it was liberated from Daesh, from the IS in 2015 afterwards. Then, and that was liberated by the resistance of women's defense forces, and there were only two streets were left that they were in their hands, but they had the commitment and said, we will defeat this fascist groups. And with this commitment, the women's defense forces, the people's defense forces, YPG and YPG, they did it. And of course, with all the international solidarity and the people that went on the border and supported the resistance. So if we establish the right understanding of solidarity through action, then we can defeat fascism. We saw this. So yeah, I want to show the example of also of the women's cooperative that was then shortly later built up in Kobani, which is the photo, I think 5 and 6, 4 and 5. So when you look at the first picture, then you see the next one, another one afterwards. There should be another picture showing Wiener Jinne. So the name of the women's cooperative is Wiener Jinne. It means women's will, and it was built up in the backyard of a house that was not very stable anymore. But when you open the door, you saw all the women gathering together and making Nûne, which is like for the winter, the vegetables, preparing them, drying them, and on one hand, it's a collective work. On the other hand, the women use traditional forms of how to produce it, so without chemicals. They collect the things from the gardens, and then at the same time, for other women who do not have the possibility to join to the work, they sell it also to them, because the other women, they go maybe and work somewhere else and have then the possibility of income. So it's also like the women who do not have the possibility are happy that they can have the traditional way of doing this, these vegetables, and do not go to and get some of the canned of unhealthy food, but in the traditional way. But on the other hand, also the women who work collectively for their own supplies during winter time, and at the same time also like have an economical income by this and support each other. So this is maybe a small example, but these kind of small coming together projects, something that if women connect their thoughts, their ideas, and are committed to do something by their own, then happens.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Şervîn, because I think what I'm hearing you talk about as you describe the Kurdish women's movement is not just a possibility for resistance to fascism and authoritarianism, but also possibilities of resistance to liberal democracy and the construct of the nation state and capitalism, right? And so our horizon needs to be even beyond thinking about how to resist fascism, but actually that is about constructing a new world. We are out of time. I just, want to express my deep gratitude to all of you for joining us in this conversation. It's been a very rich and generative conversation. I want to encourage everyone who is listening to us to read the issue, and we can put the link in the chat again. You can also continue the conversation on the YouTube channel for about 30 minutes. The chat function will continue to be open. And most importantly, I hope you're able to draw some lessons and some inspiration from the contributions in this particular journal issue. So thank you all so much for being a part of this.
Thank you also. Success.
Thank you.